Biden administration has announced a total of $39 billion in student debt relief for 804,000 borrowers. This is his last effort in student loan debt forgiveness after the Supreme Court struck down his plan to give $10,000 in student debt relief to low and middle income borrowers and up to $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients last month, The Hill reports.
The Education Department said today that the relief is being provided to income-driven repayment plans where the federal government cancels remaining balances for the borrower after they have made their payments for 20 or 25 years. The department said it will notify eligible borrowers in the coming days, according to The Hill. Jess, I got to tell you, I have a different opinion on this from a lot of my conservative friends, and I have had a lot of fierce debates on this student loan forgiveness plan. And I certainly get and respect the opinion of, well, people have paid, what do we do for them? And my response to that has typically been, well, maybe we should give a tax credit for individuals that have indeed paid back their student loans. But for Black Americans in particular, who typically have to borrow way more money than our white counterparts, this would have been a substantial blessing in terms of leveling the playing field to help Black college graduates create and foster more wealth. You have a lot of Black students who start college and who cannot finish because they can't pay. We don't often talk about that. And so there are a lot of individuals and communities of color in particular who really would have benefited from this. And so my hope is that we figure this out, because I think people do need relief. And if we talk in terms of leveling the playing field from wealth disparities from Black, white, Latino to white, we have to get to work. And this was, in my opinion, a plan in the right direction.
Right. I think we get really pedantic when we talk about who has the authority to do the forgiveness. Should it be coming from the Secretary of Education and the Department of Education? Should it be coming from Congress? Should it be coming from the executive branch? The debate really should be, is this the right thing to do in a sense of fairness and justice? Is it the right thing to do economically for the country? And those two considerations, the answer is yes. It's absolutely fair, because we saw skyrocketing tuition at the same point where we saw colleges and universities in the United States become racially integrated. This was an explicit plan. And if you go back and you read what a lot of Reagan advisors were saying at the time when they were talking about the growth in higher education in the United States, they were saying, imagine how dangerous an educated proletariat would be. And we really saw college attendance rise following the 2008 financial crisis. People didn't want to enter the job market because it was a bad one, and so they sheltered by attending universities and colleges over the next 4 years. Then we saw a lot of bankers, saw a lot of people start for-profit colleges, and people who had universities already. We saw them really become predatory in nature in how they skyrocketed tuition without increasing the real value of education, and then find a way to put working people and people who cannot afford college in a lifetime of debt. And so to set things right again, cancellation is the proper policy approach, and perhaps even making some of the people who have profited off of the crisis they created pay for it. That would make a lot of sense. I think the tax credit as well for people who have already paid their loans off is extremely fair. And bringing higher education to the point where it's more attainable for the average person makes sense as well moving forward.
I mean, the cost continues to skyrocket, Jess, and we haven't addressed it. And, a lot of my conservative friends will say, well, Shermichael, whose responsibility is it to afford everyone a college education? Whose responsibility is it to afford someone to get training for a trade or an apprenticeship, if you will? And my argument always is it's our responsibility as a country. Now, you're probably wondering, well, why is that? Well, think about all the net negatives that we often talk about. We talk about skyrocketing crime. Education would certainly solve that problem. We talk about the wealth disparities. We know that a more competitive citizenry needs to have a strong, solid foundation in terms of education, whether that's in formalized process, college or university, through apprenticeship or through trade. We know that when people are more educated, they're able to make more money. Thus, they're able to make healthier decisions for their lives. Think about the implications just that would have on our health industry in terms of aging, in terms of being able to have a healthier, older population versus one that's costing us almost $1 trillion to take care of when you compare us to other countries. And so you look at the net benefit of affording every single person an education, again, whether it's through the formal process or a secondary process, the gains for the economy is beneficial. I was looking at one study from the Barbara Bush Foundation just that showed most Americans read at a 6th grade level. And they analyzed or estimated that that's costing us about $2 trillion, Jess. $2 trillion that could be pumped into our economy. But it's not, because we're not addressing education the way we should. And so in my opinion, this isn't Republican, this isn't Democrat, this isn't conservative or liberal. This is about making sure that the United States of America is in the best competitive space in the next 20 to 25 years. And the way to do so is to fix our education crisis. And if you look at minority communities in this country and you're concerned about crime, you're concerned about poverty, then give an opportunity for people in those communities to get an education so that they are competitive and can earn a quality wage.
Yeah, it's good for the economy as a whole to have an educated workforce, people qualified to do their job that they're tasked to do. It also makes society a better place to live in when you have an educated population. When I think about the current debates we have politically, a lot of them are centered around, should we have public goods? What is the government for at all? People came together and said, if we pool our resources together, we can have much better schools than if you or I, Shermichael, just decided we're going to hire a teacher to teach our kids. This is a part of the benefit of living in a society. Adam Smith, who's considered the father of capitalism for some reason, is someone who theorized that human beings became the dominant species on the planet because we learned to work together and accomplish more than we could separately. There are certain things that we can provide because we are all productive working members of our society. We can have roads to drive on. We can have good schools. We can have trade schools in addition to higher education universities. We can have a publicly funded retirement for people who want to retire after working for all of their lives. There are a lot of things that are now called into question. Why? Because there are a lot of companies and corporations who see, well, if we privatize healthcare, if we privatize education, if we privatize Social Security, we can make a lot of money off of it by charging people more than maybe they value it, or maybe we value this so much we want to guarantee it for the people. It's good to have a market and have a free market, but there are some things that people value so much that we can afford to provide up as public goods that we all would like to get at a much lower price than we would pay in if we were paying a corporation that was trying to profit off of our consumption of it. There are some things that should just be guaranteed to live in a good society, and education is certainly one of them.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, Jess, as I said, this to me isn't about partisan politics. This isn't a left or right issue. I think about China. China just pumped in, I believe, $250 billion, Jess, about 2 or 3 years ago, the Chinese government, that is, into higher education. While we in the United States debate whether or not we want to even afford the next generation of leaders a proper education. How can you compete against the second largest economy in the world if they surpass us academically? And just according to every metric, mathematics, science, now writing, now even the arts, which may baffle some of our viewers, the Chinese, they're now surpassing us, Jess. I mean, if you look at where the United States ranks in terms of science and math, we're in the low 20s, some estimates in the higher 30s. And so when you look at these metrics and numbers, you have to ask yourself whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, are our leaders making the right decisions in terms of making sure the best interests of this country in the long run is being put forth? Or are they more focused on interest groups or major corporations or major banks that back these loans, that seem to be more interested in making a profit than the welfare of the student? Again, this isn't a partisan issue. We're talking about the future competitiveness of this country. And the minute we get into this left or right issue, Jess, I think we completely missed the boat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to make higher education affordable. We need public universities to be something that's publicly provided in a similar way as K through 12 education is, in addition to trade schools for people who don't want to get a 2 or 4 year degree. That's just common sense. And the way this issue's currently been framed, as there are a lot of people who would have liked to have the chance to go to college and then have all of their debt canceled. okay, those people should have the opportunity to achieve higher education and get a degree if they would like to. But also, we need to do something about all of the people that have been the victims of price gouging on behalf of people who wanted to profit off of the student loan debt crisis. There's a word in economics for that behavior. It is price gouging when you have an increased demand for a good of service, and then the price for that good or service is increased without increasing the value or quality of that good or service, simply because demand is increased for something that is a necessity for people, which education is. That's price gouging. You can't do that. And to correct that predatory economic behavior, the government should step in and say, we are canceling student loan debt. Moreover, we could input, a windfalls profits tax on all of the people who have profited off of the student loan debt crisis. There are things we can do, set things right in the past and have a path forward. And the way this conversation has solely been around the legality, when the Higher Education Act of 1965 very explicitly grants this authority to the Department of Education. It's just unnecessary to have this argument as whether or not it's legal, and instead have the conversation whether or not it's right, and have Congress pass new legislation so that they do have the authority to set things right when it comes to the student loan debt crisis and the greater crisis around higher education in the United States.
I mean, look, Jess, I'll say this before we go. If you're a conservative and you're tired of dealing with rising crime, that's a big topic in the country right now. You're tired of dealing with drugs or the opioid pandemic. I looked at a comparative analysis from the Brookings Institute and the Conservative Heritage Foundation. And both of those institutes showcased an educated populace makes better decisions. You're more than likely to not commit crime. You're more than likely not to commit a violent crime. You're more than likely not to find yourself addicted to medication or other types of horrendous drug usage because you're able to compete in the workplace. You have the comfort, the financial security of providing for yourself and your family. We cannot get caught up into this left or right issue because the net benefit is for all of us. More Rising after this.